Hey everybody, welcome to another model building workshop. I'm Mr. Allen and I'm coming to you on behalf of the Community Libraries of Providence here from my basement workshop in Providence, Rhode Island. And today we are looking at the British infantry tank, the Mark II Matilda. This was called unofficially the Queen of the Battlefield for the early part of the war. So we're looking at the old Tamiya kit from the 1970s, the vintage one, and they do have a newer version of this, or two newer versions of this that have been done the 2000s. That I think is pretty much a retool. I have not purchased or looked at one of those yet because I'm still working off some of the older kits in my stash here. So that's what we have. So this is how my project is going along with my Matilda so far. Like I said, this is the older kit from the 70s, the vintage one. And I'm doing this, as you can see, in the early war two-tone green European camouflage. Got a lot of work still left to do on this. Well, let's look and see what's in the box. I have another one here that someone lent me to use for this demo. Shows it here in a desert color. Which, to be fair, it's the main battlefield that this was used. So, you get a nice big long story here on the instruction sheet. And I'm not going to get too much into the history of this tank, since I think a lot of model builders out there are pretty familiar with the Matilda. It's a very famous British tank, probably one of the more famous of the British tanks. It's an infantry tank, and it was meant to move along with the speed of a marching infantry. So it is slow, but it was very heavily armored, had very thick armored plates on it, which in 1940 made it a very formidable opponent because the armor was so thick that the German guns at the time the shells were just bouncing off this. And in a battle in France, there was much panic as these things were just rolling through, and the Germans just couldn't stop them until they were able to bring up the dreaded 88 millimeter anti-aircraft guns. Anti-aircraft guns. They moved those in. That's what Rommel did at the time. Moved those in, and those were able to stop these tanks dead in their tracks. But that's what it took at that time, and that was a challenge. So there was a breakthrough that almost happened in the Battle of France that could have changed that entire battle, but that's what stopped it. So, and you can see that it's kind of illustrated here with a 37 millimeter anti-tank gun, which was the normal anti-tank gun of the time, and the bigger 88 here. And this here, this weird looking thing, is the Matilda 1, which is also in use at that time and in that battle. But the Matilda 1 is a very much smaller tank, which had a single machine gun in the turret. And that was the A11 tank, and the A12 is the Matilda 2, which is a completely different tank altogether. So up until 1941, this tank was the most heavily armored vehicle in service anywhere, with the exception of the Soviet Union's KV tanks. But its general effectiveness was limited, it says here, by its low mobility, and the main armament of this tank was a 2-pounder gun, which is the equivalent of 40 millimeters. And that fired solid shot only, so you could not do any of the high explosive rounds. So this had an anti-tank shot only. Yeah, it's the Battle of Arras, A-R-R-A-S, where that counterattack happened. So some of these were also sent on to the Soviet Union as part of the Lend-Lease program. So Tamiya now has a version of a Soviet adaptation. So that's out there as well. All right, so let's look at there's more photos on the back and some fun special versions here, which would be fun to do. I think that if you get aftermarket pieces for that, that could be fun. Another variant that's not really talked about here. So when this tank became outdated, shall we say, or obsolete in the European campaigns, it then moved on to the Far East with the Australian forces, in which it was in its element because the Japanese, the standard anti-tank gun was a 37 millimeter, which was useless against this. So these did well in the Pacific battles with the Australian forces, and the Australians also converted these into flamethrower tanks known as the Frog, and you can get aftermarket parts out there to convert one to that configuration if you so desired, because that's an interesting vehicle as well. Typical Tamiya map style. Yeah. Here's all your decals with all of the breakdown, what they all stand for. Because you get options to do all kinds of stuff with this kit. Here's your parts breakdown here. They do give you a few examples of actual vehicles here with the decals, and they give you plenty to experiment and do your own thing if you wish. This one is a combination, or it will be when I'm done. Where is the opening here in this sheet? So, like I said, it folds out map style. So you start with the running gear and the hull parts. Moving on to the turret. There are a lot of wheels to this kit, so be ready for that. Not uncommon for British tanks the early war period. And there are some interesting options here. So it talks about it, talks about it here. So get this so it's not quite so cumbersome. You look at the turret here, you have an option for two different types of mantlets, gun mantlets, with different machine gun mountings. One's for like a liquid cool, I believe the liquid cool Vickers gun, and the other is for I think the BESA gun on the other one. BESA? I'm not sure how that's pronounced or if it's pronounced that way at all. Anyway, you've got options for two types of machine guns here. I opted with the early one that had this armored sleeve for it, which I believe was a Vickers. Should probably look that up on the instruction sheet, but you'll see it's got that big sleeve of protection over it. Just pause for 1 second here. Okay, and as I mentioned earlier, here's the wheels, the small wheels, the suspension system that goes with this. Moving on, a lot of work on the hull. Getting cumbersome here working with all of this. A lot of armor plates. And then finally, get the finishing touches there. If you can see that. There's rubber band style tracks, which I don't think really is much of a problem since you're not going to see much of that behind those shields anyway. And they give you a figure which is in the desert North African uniform there, or possibly even Far East. I think we've already looked at the marking options, such as they are here. But we can look at more in the book in just a second. So in the box, I have some other things here. So, when is this from? This is from 2009. Someone had this, so I'm guessing this is when this was new. But that's the newer version of the Tamiya one, with the marking options there. Idea of the paint style. They do make some aftermarket pieces, like if you wanted the 2-pounder gun. There's one here from Jordi Rubio. If you want a solid metal one. What else is in this box? All kinds of fun stuff in here. Some reference pictures for painting options. A reference picture from an Airfix version, which shows the Quanter scheme. Although the blue is probably not accurate, it's probably more of a gray. The other instruction sheet, which is in Japanese. The band tracks, which I don't think are bad. You have to melt the pins on it, the old style. And again, you're not going to see, you don't see much. I mean, if it's upside down, you will see a lot. But otherwise, that's all you're going to see of it. The front and the back, because you've got these enormous plates which block the view. So an example of the parts here. Standard Tamiya. Come on. Then we have all the itty bitty wheels. Part of the side skirt style armor. And we get the fuel tank, gun mantlet options here. Vent cooling louvers and exhaust pipes. So I had made some miscalculations on the exhaust pipes that I was going to paint them rusty, but it looks like they are covered in some sort of like an asbestos or some sort of a packing. So that's something to look at when you're working on building one of these. See, the exhaust is a little different. And here's a decal sheet which has a lot on it. Now the white doesn't really show up, but there are some names and some things there. So there's a lot of possibilities with this sheet, but you may want to do some research, because the instructions don't give you a whole lot of legit options there. If you want to just experiment and have fun, you can certainly do that, which is okay. And then the bottom of the hull, yeah, the track is stuck to it. Sure is. You can see the old battery holder there from when this was a motorized kit at some point. It says 1973 Tamiya, so that's the date there. There's your whole tub. Let's take a look at the book here I've been using for quite a while in these episodes. The World War II Tank Encyclopedia, in color, 39 to 45. So, some options here for painting styles. There's the European green that I'm working on. There's a contour scheme here. They've done a lot more research on what this scheme really was. It seems to be like a pale stone color, which is sort of a light tan. And there's a lighter gray and a darker gray. Seems to be what the consensus is at the moment as to what those colors really are. Things like that always change. There's one down here, also in a contour scheme. Looks like it's green and brown and tan there. Of course, the tanks on the other side are really interesting. These early ones, including the Matilda 1 down the bottom here. If you're in the New England area, the American Heritage Museum in Massachusetts does actually have a Matilda there you can look at in person, and that was kind of mind-blowing for me just to see one up close and personal on this side of the Atlantic Ocean as opposed to going to the Imperial War Museum overseas or Bovington. But yeah, we have one here, and it's very helpful to see one because, like I'm talking about with the exhaust pipes, I'm good to see the real thing, which is not what I would have expected the pipes to look like. So if you're not anywhere near there, you can always Google and try to look at some of the photos online. So some other painting options, if you're less adventurous, is the solid color. Here's one here that was used by the Australians in a interesting camo version there, and another all sand one down the bottom. So lots of different possibilities to paint one. Unfortunately, they don't give one here. Let me see if I can find an example of this other scheme, which is used on Malta. And I believe some of these tanks were there. Yeah. You can see it on the Mark 6 here. Malta had, whoops, be careful here, had this interesting stonework looking camouflage. So I think there are Matildas with that on it. And I'm not completely sure what the colors were for the ones that were in Crete, because some of these were in Crete. Although they had some difficulty traversing the terrain with the stoned rocky ground, these things being heavy, the tracks just couldn't get any traction with the stones and the loose rocks. They just kind of... Anyway, so this is how it's going so far. It's typical, goes together pretty easily. The side skirts, I did find some issues here. You can see that there's some fit issues I have to kind of work on correcting. You know, just getting all of that together, getting the tracks on there. Noticing I've got a gap in the front here. If you can see that, that's going to need to be filled with some putty or some mud. So I am running into some issues. And I'm going to assume, although I don't know from experience, that the newer versions have hopefully fixed these things, but we'll see. Maybe someday I'll look at one of those kits. So yeah, interesting, fun tank, lots of detail, lots of things to, you know, to really have fun weathering. All kinds of shapes and bumps and things. And again, with a lot of painting options. So, that's the Matilda Mark II. And we'll see you soon on the next model building workshop. Keep on building. Bye now.